Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a key performance indicator or a KPI to lay out your workplace injuries and illnesses in a different way that will allow you to compare facilities, track trends, and hopefully better know how to implement corrective actions to prevent those same injuries from occurring in the future. Hi, I'm Jennifer from Jester Safety Resources. If you handle the reporting for employee injuries, you've likely accumulated quite a bit of data, but don't know how to interpret what you're actually looking at or for. In this tutorial, I'll walk you through the process of creating a KPI that you can share with other members of your management team as a part of a health and safety performance review. KPI is an acronym that stands for Key Performance Indicator. This type of report can measure performance and progress toward a specific target goal over time. The amount of time that we set between reviews can be determined based on your needs and could be set anywhere from weekly to monthly, quarterly, or annually. Keep in mind, though, you may not get as accurate of a picture in regard to trending and outliers if you review it too frequently, so I would recommend a quarterly or annual review. Some advantages to having a regularly scheduled KPI include being able to better monitor employee injuries, looking for trends and identifying any outliers, setting reduced injury target goals within your company for the following year and continuing to lower those targets annually on an ongoing basis. Now let's take a look at the main components included in the KPI. For this tutorial, we've divided it into 6 main sections, starting with the objective. Next is the annual recordable injuries, incident rates, which also include your DART or days away, restricted, or transferred, and lost time rates. Injury classifications, which can be observed by year. And dashboard and summary. We'll start with the objective. Your objective is always going to be to demonstrate continuous improvement in health and safety performance. So the aim of your KPI is to set measurable goals and targets to benchmark the decrease in your workplace injury and illness rates. As an example, on your KPI, you could state your intention as to reduce the injury rate by 4% in the next year. Recordable injuries. To get started gathering data on our recordable injuries and illnesses, we'll briefly review what exactly constitutes them as recordable. According to OSHA general reporting criteria, you must consider an injury or illness to be recordable if it results in any of the following. The first criteria is death. Criteria 2 would be if the injury resulted in days away from work. Criteria 3 would be if the injury or illness resulted in restricted work or job transfer. Criteria 4 is if the injury required medical treatment beyond first aid. And finally, the 5th criteria is if there was loss of consciousness. Start by gathering all of the information that you'll need to put together your KPI. Loving Excel the way that I do, I use it to record the types of data for each year that I plan to include in the KPI. You can see that for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm laying out injury information for 2 separate sites that I manage. It's identical information for both the ABC company and the EFG company. Next, I'll outline each item that I'll be collecting data for. I recommend you start with your injury summaries, which include the average number of employees, total hours worked by all employees that year, total recordable injuries, total reported first aid incidents, total cases of job restrictions or transfer, total cases of days away from work, total days away from work, total deaths, OSHA recordable incident rate, lost time case rate, days away or restricted incident rate or DART, and workers' compensation modification, or otherwise known as the experience modification rate. Next, compile data for each of your injury classifications, which should include the following: overuse and overexertion, struck against or struck by, lacerations, slips, trips, and falls, caught-in injuries, chemical exposures, and other injuries. So now that I've told you what to include, now I'm going to tell you where you can find the information that you need to get started. I normally start by pulling up the OSHA 300A form. This is the summary of work-related injuries and illnesses for any year that I'm including on my KPI. I like to provide information for at least a 5-year time period if possible. Data for both the average number of employees and the total hours worked information can be located on the OSHA 300 under Establishment Information and can be entered into your spreadsheet. On the same 300A form, you can also obtain the total recordable injuries information. I also track all employee injuries and illnesses through the year on my own separate spreadsheet using information from employee medical work status reports, OSHA logs, and workers' compensation claims reports. I'll show you how to build your own injury tracker in a different tutorial, but for now, here's a partial screenshot. Notice that I've created a column labeled Claim Type, in which I would specify the type of injury such as indemnity, medical only, or first aid. This is a really efficient way to collect large amounts of information in a relatively short period of time when needed for your KPI. Information for total cases of job restrictions or transfer, total cases of days away from work, total days away from work, and total deaths can all be obtained from the number of cases and number of days section of Form 300A. The OSHA recordable incidence rate can be determined through the following calculation. Multiply the total number of injuries and illnesses by 200,000, then divide that by the total number of hours worked by all employees. Lost time is the term that most of us in the industry use when we're referring to work-related injuries and illnesses that result in days away from work. Check column H to see how many cases had days away from work. Be sure not to use the total number of days away that were taken each year, only how many cases involved days away. Days away, restricted, or transferred days, or DART, are also entered and counted on the OSHA Form 300. This is calculated by adding the total number of entries in columns H, which is days away from work, plus column I, which is restriction and transfer, and multiply that number by 200,000. Then take that number and divide it by the total number of hours worked by all employees. You may be wondering where the number 200,000 came from. It represents the number of hours that 100 employees would work over a 50-week span, assuming that they each put in 40 hours a week. An experience modification rate, otherwise known as EMR or XMOD, is a number used by insurance companies to either discount or increase the premiums that you pay for workers' compensation coverage. It's based on your company's workers' compensation claim history and reflects the most recent 3 years. The XMOD rate is calculated by dividing a company's actual workers' compensation claims due to health and safety incidents by the claims expected from a firm in the same industry as yours and the same state. This is calculated through the following. You take your actual losses divided by your expected losses and multiply that by 100. Let's take a look at an example. You should be able to obtain an XMOD report from your company's workers' compensation carrier. This is just an example of what one could look like. We can clearly see that for this California-based company, only in years 2022 and 23 did the company have EMRs below 100%, which should have resulted in a policy price reduction. Generally, as part of the California Code of Regulations, an XMOD of less than 100 reflects better than average experience, while an XMOD of more than 100% reflects a worse than average experience. Other X mods may look at the rating as needing to simply be below 1 in order to be considered a good EMR. In addition, the report will list the previous year's rates as you can see here. There are several ways to collect the injury classification information, and I'll again refer back to the OSHA 300 log in my injury tracker, which contain a column labeled contributing factor, which I've broken down each injury into a specific classification. I always use Excel to create my charts because it's so easy. Let's assume you now have all of the information that you need compiled and ready to go. We'll start with looking at the annual recordable cases. So on a spreadsheet, you enter both locations, if applicable, the years being observed, and the annual number of recordable cases for each facility based on the year. Highlight all of the cells that contain data and select the Insert tab. Once there, select the type of chart you'd like to generate. For what we're doing today, I've just chosen a simple line graph. Click the outside edge of your chart to select it, and then click the plus button to show a drop-down menu of chart elements. In addition to the elements that have already been selected by default, I've also chosen axis title, chart title, and data table. Now you can customize the title at the top, as well as titles for your X and Y axis. You'll also have a table at the bottom of the chart that shows the actual data being observed. Here's an example of what the finished chart will look like. You can then copy and paste this from Excel directly into your KPI report once you're ready to do so. In this example, I've set the company target at no more than 3 employee injuries or illnesses annually, and I indicate that by placing a red line across the chart. This is called the target indicator line. You can easily see that for this example, the injuries have exceeded that target goal between the years 2014 and 2021. It's been suggested that you aim to reduce the total case rates by 4% each year unless your injury rate is already below the national target, in which case aim for a 1% annual reduction. These targets can be broken down by industry and found on the website of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Incident, lost time, and days away restricted or transferred, or DART rates. The main goal is to analyze your lost time injury and illness data and create a summary of the measures taken to address the most frequent and severe cases. Aim to reduce lost day rates by 1% per year below the baseline or maintain a rate of 15 days or less. This chart represents incident rates. Incident rates are lagging indicators that show workplace incidents that happened in the past in order to compare data. In your KPI report, you could describe this chart by saying something like this. For every 100 employees at ABC in 2021, approximately 11 had a recordable injury or illness with a rate that had decreased annually since 2018 until its sharp increase in 2021. EFG also showed its lowest rate to date at 5.99 injuries or illnesses out of every 100 employees in 2020, reflecting an annual decrease every year since 2016, with the exception of 2021, when the recordable rate spiked up to 10.73. Be sure to also set targets each year and then measure your data against them. My next chart is Workers' Compensation Modification Rate Percentage Chart, or XMOD. This type of mod rate compares actual losses to expected ones. In other words, it's the statistical chance that a company will incur a workers' compensation claim. Again, a mod rate greater than 100% usually results in increased insurance premiums, while rates below 100% would decrease premiums. This figure shows the OSHA recordable incident rates for ABC Company from the years 2014 to 2024. However, in this example, the EFG Company is missing data between 2014 and 2017. When this happens, be sure to explain any gaps in your data and then just move forward without it. In your KPI, you could describe this chart like this. The data shows that both facilities had a decline in percentage rates each year from 2019 through 2021. However, between 2022 and 23, there's been an increase in the modification rates. Rates continued to decrease into 2024 for the EFG company, while the ABC company saw its first rise in mod rates since 2019, which has contributed to an increased severity of the reported injuries. The next chart I made represents the lost time case rate. This is a standard that OSHA uses to calculate the number of lost time incidents per 100 employees. Keep in mind, though, that not all recordable incidents result in lost time, so be sure to keep them separate when you're gathering your data. This chart could be described like this. Data for ABC shows that for every 100 employees, 2017 had the highest recorded rate of 3.87, followed by a decrease in lost time rates each year through 2020 until it spiked in 2021 with a rate of 6.43, which is the highest rate since 2014. EFG started 2017 with their lowest rate of 1.46 and showed an annual increase that ended in 2019 at a rate of 1.85. However, there have been 0 lost time injuries since 2020. A DART rate stands for Days Away, Restricted, or Transfer rate and includes only those OSHA recordable injuries or illnesses that resulted in days away from work, restricted duty, or transfer of duties. When you've been missing data that can't be verified, like I do here, just calculate an estimation based on the data that's available to you. You can also see how charts like this make it visually easy to quickly identify any spikes in your injury rates. Injury classifications. For injury classifications, I'll refer back to the spreadsheet that I mentioned having created earlier. For each injury recorded, I identified it by both injury type and contributing factor. For this tutorial, when I refer to injury classifications, I'm referring to the contributing factors, which are broken down by things like chemical exposure, struck against, caught between, etc. This first chart is an example of injury classifications by year. Having a chart like this makes it easier to see which types of injuries were most prevalent. For example, it shows that recordable injuries related to chemical exposures were the most prevalent in the year 2021, followed by struck by and slips, trips, and falls. You could go even further by looking at the chemical exposure injuries more closely by creating a chart showing how it trends over the course of several years. Here's an example showing just that, starting in 2016 and ending in 2022. Now you can see that between the ABC and EFG companies, EFG had the most occurrences, primarily in 2018 and 2020. This shows that depending on what you're trying to evaluate, there are multiple ways that your data can be arranged and charted, helping you hopefully determine the root causes to prevent recurrence. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with dashboard and summary. A KPI dashboard displays key performance indicators and interactive charts and graphs, allowing for quick, organized review and analysis. Having everything summarized together helps you keep on top of issues and trends at a higher level. Having a dashboard is a visually easy way to measure your progress toward objectives and goals. The summary is a good place to compare graphs and determine why the numbers are the way they are based on previous targets that were set by your company. It's also a great time to set new lower goals for the next year, with the target always being to lower your injury rates. And there you have it. A KPI template can be found on the Paper Jester Safety Resources website at www.paperjester.com, where I hope you'll also subscribe to receive notifications every time we add something new. As always, it's my hope that you found value in these tips and tutorials. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Stay tuned and take care, my friends.